The Syrian president has finally succumbed to the war and has fled Syria. Now I'm going to take you on a brief journey on the history of how this war started and this great dynasty known as the Assad family. Before we delve right into the details of today's news, if this is your first time here or you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe. Give this video a massive thumbs up to encourage us to put out more reliable and authentic news. Lastly, please leave your opinions in the comment section below as well. The fall of Bashar Assad after 14 years of war in Syria brings to an end a decades-long dynasty. A family picture dated 1985 shows Syria's late president Hafiz Assad and his wife Anisha Makhlouf seated, and behind them, from right to left, there are 5 children: Bushra, the late Majd, the late Basil, 1962 to 1994, deposited President Bashar, and the youngest son, Maher. A Syrian war monitor said that Assad has left the country after losing swaths of territory to a lightning offensive led by an Islamic-led rebel coalition that said it entered Damascus on December 8, 2024. The fall of Syrian President Bashar Assad's government on Sunday brought to a dramatic close his family's nearly 14 years struggle to hold on to power as his country fragmented amid a brutal civil war that became a proxy battlefield for regional and international powers. Assad's downfall came as a stark contrast to his first months as Syria's unlikely president in 2000, when many hoped he would be a young reformer after 3 decades of his father's iron grip. Only 34 years old, the Western-educated ophthalmologist was a rather geeky, tech-savvy fan of computers with a gentle demeanor. But when faced with protests against his rule that erupted in March 2011, Assad turned to the brutal tactics of his father in an attempt to crush them. As the uprising emerged into an outright civil war, he unleashed his military to blast opposition-held cities with support from allies, Iran and Russia. International rights groups and prosecutors allege widespread use of torture and extrajudicial executions in Syria's government-run detention centers. The Syrian war has killed nearly 500,000 people and displaced half a country's pre-war population of 23 million. As the uprising spiraled into a civil war, millions of Syrians fled across the borders into Jordan, Turkey, Iran, and Lebanon, and on to Europe. Its departure brings an end to the Assad family rule, spanning just under 54 years, with no clear successor. It throws the country into further uncertainty. Until recently, it seemed that Assad was almost out of the woods. The long-running conflict had settled along frozen conflict lines in recent years, with Assad government regaining control of most of Syria's territory, while the northwest remained under the control of opposition groups and the northeast under Kurdish control. While Damascus remained under crippling Western sanctions, neighboring countries had begun to resign themselves to Assad's continued hold on power. The Arab League reinstated Syria's membership last year, and Saudi Arabia in May announced the appointment of its first ambassador to Syria since severing ties with Damascus 12 years earlier. However, The geopolitical tide turned quickly with a surprise offensive launched by opposition groups based in northwest Syria in late November. Government forces quickly collapsed while Assad's allies, preoccupied by other conflicts, including Russia's war in Ukraine and the year-long wars between Israel and the Iran-backed militant groups, Hezbollah and Hamas, appeared reluctant to forcefully intervene. Assad's whereabouts were not clear on Sunday amid reports he had fled the country as insurgents took control of the Syrian capital. He came to power in 2000 by a twist of fate. His father had been cultivating Bashar's oldest brother, Bashar, as his successor, but in 1994, Bashar was killed in a car crash in Damascus. Bashar was brought home from his ophthalmology practice in London, put through military training, and elevated to the rank of colonel to establish his credentials so he could one day rule. When Hafez Assad died in 2000, Parliament quickly lowered the presidential age requirement from 40 to 34. Bashar's elevation was sealed by a nationwide referendum in which he was the only candidate. Hafez, a long-lived military man, ruled the country for nearly 30 years, during which he set up a sovereign-style centralized economy and kept such a stifling hand over dissent that Syrians feared even a joke about politics to their friends. He pursued a secular ideology that sought to bury sectarian differences under Arab nationalism and the image of heroic resistance to Israel. He formed an alliance with the Shiite clerical leadership in Iran, sealed Syrians' domination over Lebanon, and set up a network of Palestinian and Lebanese military groups. Bashar initially seemed completely unlike his strongman father. Tall and lanky, with a slight lips, he had a quiet, gentle demeanor. His only official position before becoming president was head of the Syrian Computer Society. His wife, Asma al-Akrams, whom he married several months after taking office, was attractive, stylish, and British-born. The young couple, who eventually had 3 children, seemed to shun trappings of power. They lived in an apartment in the upscale Abu Romane district of Damascus, as opposed to a palatial mansion like other Arab leaders. Initially, upon coming to office, Assad freed political prisoners and allowed more open discourse. In the Damascus Spring, salons for intellectuals emerged, while Syrians could discuss art, culture, and politics to a degree impossible under his father. But after 1,000 intellectuals signed a public petition calling for multi-party democracy and greater freedoms in 2001, and others tried to form a political party, the salons were snuffed out by the feared secret police, who jailed dozens of activists. Instead of a political opening, Assad turned to economic reforms. He slowly lifted economic restrictions, let in foreign banks, threw the doors open to imports, and empowered the private sector. Damascus and other cities, long marred in drabness, saw a flourishing of shopping malls, new restaurants, and consumer goods. Terrorism swelled. Abroad, he stuck to the line his father had set, based on the alliance with Iran and a policy of insisting on a full return of Israeli-annexed Golan Heights. Although in practice, Assad never militarily confronted Israel. In 2005, he suffered a heavy blow with the loss of Syrians' decades-old control over neighboring Lebanon after the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, with many Lebanese accusing Damascus of being behind the slaying. Syria was forced to withdraw its troops from the country, and a pro-American government came into power. At the same time, the Arab world became split into two camps, one of US-allied, Sunni-led countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, the other, Syria and Shiite-led Iran, with their ties to Hezbollah and Palestinian militants. Throughout, Assad relied for largely on the same power base at home as his father. Is Alawite sect, an offshoot of Shiite Islam, comprising around 10% of the population. Many of the positions in his government went to younger generations of the same families that had worked for his father. Drawn in as well were the new middle class created by his reforms, including prominent Sunni merchant families. Assad also turned to his own family. His younger brother, Meher, headed the elite presidential guard and would lead the crackdown against the uprising. Their sister, Bushra, was a strong voice in his inner circle, along with her husband, Deputy Defense Minister Asef Shokat, until he was killed in a 2012 bombing. Bashar's cousin, Rami Makhlouf, became the country's biggest businessman, heading a financial empire before the two had a falling out that led to Makhlouf being pushed aside. Assad also increasingly entrusted key roles to his wife, Ashma, before she announced in May that she was undergoing treatment for leukemia and stepped out of the limelight. When protests erupted in Tunisia and Egypt, eventually toppling their rulers, Assad dismissed the possibility of the same occurring in his country, insisting his regime was more in tune with its people. After the Arab Spring wave did move to Syria, his security forces staged a brutal crackdown, while Assad consistently denied he was forcing a popular revolt, instead blaming foreign-backed terrorists trying to destabilize his regime. His rhetoric struck a chord with many in Syria's minority groups, including Christians, Druze, and Shiites, as well as some Sunnis who feared the prospect of rule by Sunni extremists even more than they disliked Assad's authoritarian rule. Ironically, in February 26, 2001, 2 days after the fall of Egypt's Hosni Mubarak to protesters and just before the wave of Arab Spring protests swept into Syria, in an email released by WikiLeaks as part of a cache in 2012, Assad emailed a joke he had run across, mocking the Egyptian leader's stubborn refusal to step down. What are your thoughts? Let's have them in the comment section below. Thank you very much for always listening and watching. I will see you all in my next video. Bye for now.